Hello. Oh, this is really weird. I think this mic is supposed to be subtle on someone, but on my skin, it's very, you can see it really well. How's everyone this morning? Good. All right. I don't know if this is on. How do I know if this is on? Point it here. No, I don't see any light. Anyway, sorry about that. So, for those who don't know me, little introduction about myself. Obviously, my name is Alex Oriel, and I'm one of the young couple leaders here at the church. If you're here last year, if you heard my baptismal testimony, you would have known that I'm a pretty introverted person. So me being up here is really weird, and feels like my heart's gonna come out of my chest. But apparently God's grown me, and apparently He wants me. Thank you. Wants me to deliver His message today. To address the elephant in the room. Since then, my wife and I have gone through a pretty trying year. But I truly believe that that experience sharpened me to be a stronger man. So I've never given a sermon before, so I don't even know what to do with my hands. I don't know if I should be like walking around or something, but I do have experience giving lessons at Bible studies, so I'm just going to treat this as a big Bible study. And besides, I think the message content is a little bit more important than how I deliver it. Anyway, that's the excuse I'm going to go with. Feedback. So if you ever heard me teach in Bible studies or even talk, I always say that the topics that I choose are not just for you guys, but it's something that I need to hear myself. So when I'm speaking to you, I'm also speaking to my own heart, and this is something that is kind of close to me. So just to explain my outfit today, my mom, the second she saw me, she's like, "Oh, how come you're not wearing a suit?" Well, I'm already uncomfortable being up here, so wearing a tie would make me more uncomfortable. So this is why I'm like this. Plus, I'm not a pastor, so I decided not to pretend to be one. And speaking of comfortable, I was thinking to myself of other preachers in the Bible, and one teacher that I thought about was Jonah, and he lived a few months in a whale and got spat out, and probably didn't shower for weeks. So I said, why not me? So this message should be short and sweet. It's only a few pages long. We should be out before lunch on Tuesday. Obviously, this is not an iPad like Pastor Andoni uses. He's a hip and tech-savvy guy, and I'm not. So today's topic is about failing. What comes to mind when you think of failure? So I'm going to go through some slides, if you can read that. It says, take one capsule by mouth nightly, 3 hours before dead. I'm pretty sure that's not a good prescription. The next one here, I'm pretty sure he's regurting that one. No, regurts. That's on your body forever, man. This one, okay, so you hear that there's no privacy with social media. This takes it to a whole another level. Ooh, any DC fans here? No. Ooh, did that hurt you? Justice League didn't do so well, if you don't know. So if you're a nerd like me, this is blasphemy. Obviously, Star Wars, and that's Starship Enterprise, which is from Star Trek. This one, someone failed at their job. I don't know what happened to quality control there. Oh, this is an exotic fruit. It's called curved yellow fruit. It's pretty cheap for 40 cents, actually. And I think I have one more. Oh, oops. How did that get in there? That one was for you. Don't worry, we lost in the playoffs, so it's okay. So, just to gauge the demographic here and actually participate, because I'm kind of curious. So, raise your hand if you have failed at least once in your life. All right. Now, keep your hands up if you failed about a dozen times. Okay. How about thousands of times? All right. Excuse me while I blow my nose. I'm failing right now. Now the kicker. Who's failed countless times? All right. Perfect. I'm glad you guys raised your hand because we could probably put a sign in front of the church place of failing people. And whoever didn't raise their hand, we'll pray healing over you because apparently you suffered random memory loss. That I insulted everyone. We're going to get to the actual message. So the hard truth in life is that everyone fails. To help illustrate failure, I'm going to say some synonyms here, and if one word resonates in your mind, just in your mind this time, not physically, but just raise your hand up. Collapse, defeat, non-success, coming to nothing, falling through, screw up, disaster, betrayal, loser, letdown, bankrupt, decline, loss, deficient, inadequate, underestimate, faulty, and the last one is mistake. So, as you can tell, as I was running through that list, this is going to be a very uplifting message. The reason my message is titled F+, it's for a reason. If anyone thinks of a failing grade in school, you know the F grade is just that, you failed. The F for failure, it's not like any other grade, there's no plus or minus. It's not like a B+ or a B-. It's just F. For example, with a B+ in school, everyone knows that if you get a B+, it would denote that you weren't quite excellent, but then a B- would denote that you were borderline mediocre. So, but with an F grade, there's no further explanation. You failed. There's an inherent negativity to that grade. Failing is often cast in a negative light, which it should be. But what if I told you that failing can also be a benefit? So I see some of you looking at me saying, see, I told my dad F stands for effort. So in life, when you experience failure, it can be much of the same. There's nothing further to be explained. You failed, or someone has failed you, enough said. But what's often missed in those mixed feelings is that there is a greater opportunity to improve when you fail. There is a greater opportunity to improve when you fail. So let's break it down. How do you know you failed? In order to fail, there needs to be some sort of threshold or metric to measure up to. So, what I mean is there has to be a bar or control that an outcome is compared to. So, in terms of school, if you set the bar at, say, 60% grade and you come below that, you failed, right? In terms of Christianity, God gives us his standards, and he uses Jesus as his metric. What I mean by that is, here's some examples. God said, don't lie. Jesus never did, but we have, so we have failed. God said, don't slander someone. Jesus never did, but we have, so we have failed. God said, don't murder. Now, murder is also thinking of harming someone. It's not necessarily killing them. Jesus never did that, but we did, or we have, so we have failed, etc., etc., etc. You know all of the, even in the 10 Commandments. Essentially, because we don't live up to the same metrics as Jesus, we've ultimately failed. But God already knows this, doesn't he? This just shows us one common human trait. We all fall short of the glory of God. That's Romans 3:23. So, out of curiosity, I always see preachers doing this, and they go into the old text and the old translations of the Greek translations. So I did the same thing, and I found out that it says, we all fall short of the glory of God. So it's pretty black and white. There's nothing else to clarify. But fortunately for us, we are redeemed by God's grace. What does that mean in non-churchanese? It means we've failed and we continue to. We will always fail. We're forgiven our failures and made right by God only if we accept him. Why? Well, because he loves us, duh. So that was just my intro. We are going to break this message up into 3 segments. The first one is God uses failure. The second one is the difference between I failed and I'm a failure. And the last one is the positives of failure, or as my message is titled, F+. So the first part, God uses failure. It's often said that God can take the bad and use it for good. This is quite evident in the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 50. So just to give some background, Joseph got sold to a slaver in Egypt, and fast forward a few years, from a slave he became prime minister basically, and he was second in power to only Pharaoh. And what happened was there was a huge drought in the land, and Joseph's brothers, who sold him to the slaver, come begging for help. And what happens is in chapter 20, he confronts his brothers of the betrayal, and he tells them, what you intended for harm, God meant for good. What harm may befall from failures, God will use for good. How do I know this with certainty that he will? Well, if you flip to Jeremiah 29:11 with me, what does it say there? Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. So, having said that, it's imperative to know that this doesn't mean that you'll be free from failure or its consequences. So just because of Jeremiah 29:11, you're not going to be free from failure in life. Nor does it mean the good outcome that he's talking about is the way that you envisioned it. Furthermore, I wouldn't walk around purposely wreaking havoc and saying, it's all good, God's going to use my failures for his good. Expect failure, but don't accept it. Expect failure, but don't accept it. Accepting it, meaning you're asking for it. So, if you think of an analogy, when a boxer, he expects to get hit, right? But does he necessarily want to be hit? No. Well, okay, this is going to be very embarrassing, but Manny Pacquiao's like this. Why does he have his hands up like this? To protect himself. He's going to get hit for sure. But if he was supposed to accept the hits, he'd just be like this, right? In the same way, expect your life not to be perfect, but prepare yourself to recover when you're hit. So on the polar extreme of that, if you find yourself constantly in a losing battle, you might want to reflect on your connection with God. the downfall of paper. Uh, in Isaiah 53:6, it says that, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but if we've strayed away from the one who has not sinned, or in other words, who has not made mistakes or failed, we're prone to making mistakes ourselves. So if we revisit the boxer analogy, it's as if the boxer keeps getting hit blow after blow, and between rounds, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't go back to his corner to get sage advice. He doesn't go and sit and rest. He just sits there, or he stands there looking at his boxing gloves going, what the heck, how come I keep getting hit? In the same way, if you're not getting sage advice from God, how are you supposed to know how to protect yourself? So, I'm going to give hopefully a quick testimony on how God uses failure. Obviously, we've gone through a trying time, and basically, for a few months after everything happened, I kind of neglected to keep up with my responsibilities. So what happened was I didn't pay my NMAX bill for 3 months. Yeah, I forgot. And so obviously I get a letter in the mail saying, you're delinquent, we're going to cut off the power. I got really, really scared, obviously. So I sent money right away through e-payments. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to get our power cut off the next day, because it said you have 2 days. So I called NMAX, and they said, oh, well, unfortunately, your e-payment's going to take 3 days. Well, 3 days, I'm going to be cut off in 2 days. So I panicked even more. So what did I have to do? I had to pay again through their company website. So I paid twice. So that's 3 months worth of electricity payments twice, so 6 months worth of payments. But I thought I failed. I was telling my wife, oh man, like I'm so stupid for not paying attention to that. Well, it so happens, fast forward a few months later, I had to take a medical leave off from work. And in that month that I was off, I didn't get paid a cent. But what happened was, because I wasn't being paid, that 6 months that I basically paid for ahead of time, God used because I didn't have to pay my NMAX bill for that month. So at that time, I thought it was a failure, but God used my failure for something good. The next part of my message is I failed is vastly different from I'm a failure. I want to nail this part down. I failed defines that you made a mistake. I'm a failure defines that you were made by mistake. I failed defines that you made a mistake. I'm a failure defines that you were made by mistake. Your failures are not your identity, just like your occupation is not your identity. What you do does not define you. But I can tell that you guys are saying, no, Professor Xavier, my middle name's Xavier. Professor Xavier, is there a biblical example to help us understand this concept? Well, yeah, there's a lot, obviously. But the one that I want to focus on is the first biblical story, Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were created by God in Genesis. Now I want you guys to answer this. Did God fail when he made the earth? Did God fail when he made the tree? Did God fail when he made even the snake? No, but Eve tried to definitely pass the blame off in Genesis 3:13. Now, did God fail when he made Eve? No, but of course not. Adam tried to sell him the idea that she was made by mistake, right? He even said, well, there's something wrong with this woman that you made. It's defective. You better get a new one. What God created is not a mistake, but what God created is capable of making mistakes. Oh, went too far. There we go. what God has created is not a mistake, but what God created is capable of making mistakes. Why is that? Well, because we have free will, the gift of free will. Because we don't know we're not perfect. We don't know everything from right and wrong, but God tells us how to work towards that. Excuse me again. Oh, I wish that wasn't. So this is quite evident, quite evident, and has an example in James 1, 13 to 15. So in James 1, 13 to 15, it says, "And remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, 'God is tempting me.' God never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone. Temptation comes from your own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions." So you might criticize yourself, or even may allow your others to call you a failure. But this is a lie from the chief critic, the enemy. One simple phrase that I'm sure that a lot of you hear yourselves, as well as myself, is, "You deserve this." Satan likes to say, "You deserve this failure. You deserve these repercussions from your failure." But the lie is exposed when you read Psalm 139:14, which says that you, me, all of us, we are all made wonderful. You are not a mistake. There is no such thing as a wonderful mistake. Further to the point, remember, we're redeemed by God's grace. This means that we are no longer failures when we accept God's forgiveness. So, if we're already righted in God's eyes, why do we still go through times of failure? Firstly, it's because we live in a broken world. The world ain't perfect, so don't expect life to be. But the close second, I believe, is that we're supposed to learn something. The key to this is to try and figure it out and work on ourselves. This is the only thing that God expects of us when we fail, to repent and learn from our mistakes. Now, how can we use failure to benefit? Well, failure looks like the story of Pharaoh, In Genesis, God speaks to Pharaoh through Moses and Aaron and tells them, "Let my people go, or crazy stuff is going to happen to you." So what kind of crazy stuff happens? Well, God says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh didn't. The Nile turned into blood. God said, "Let my people go." He didn't. Frogs overran the land. Let my people go. He didn't. Lice infested the people. Let my people go. He didn't. A swarm of flies attacked. Let my people go. He didn't. Livestock died. You guys see a pattern here? Let my people go. He didn't. Egyptians contracted boils. Let my people go. He didn't. Hail destroyed the land. And here in Alberta, we know how destructive hail can be. Let my people go. He didn't. Locusts destroyed what the hail didn't. So whatever the hail didn't destroy, locusts destroyed the rest. Let my people go. He didn't. 3 days of complete darkness. Let my people go. And lastly, he didn't, and every firstborn dies. Remember, there needs to be a metric set in order for us to define failure. The metric here was set by God. What was the metric? It was pretty simple. Let my people go. Did he? No. This dude, he failed 10 times. That right there is stupidity personified. He didn't learn from his mistakes. So another lesson that we can learn from this story is that sometimes it's often, if not often, our mistakes don't influence just us, but it can harm others. Because of Pharaoh's stupidity, he let his entire country suffer. They suffered physically, morally, economically, financially, and obviously, most of all, they suffered life. So, a great scholar once said, "It is unwise to allow your failures to lead to more failure." I don't know who this guy is, but he sounds smart. So if you fail once, don't let it influence you to make the same or a different mistake. Now, one of the wisest men I've known used to tell me this in school all the time. The only stupid mistake is the one you don't learn from. He's not really a doctor, he's just my dad. So the only stupid mistake is the one you don't learn from. So think of failure as a detour in a road instead of a dead end. A dead end means there's no way forward. A detour means that you'll eventually get to where you wanted to go, your destination, just not through the route you thought you had in mind. So remember 29:11, I know the way that he wants, not what we want. So from a practical, humanly standpoint, how do we learn from our failures? We're all imperfect people, right? Yeah? Perfect people, yes. And because of that fact, we can never find enlightenment on our own. So, I can see Braden's asking me, what does enlightenment mean? Well, it means there's no need for improvement or discovery or fulfillment. Basically, you have it all. Who here thinks they have it all? Good. I can keep going then. No. So, one side note about this is we don't correct our own failures by trying to correct other people's failures. If we read Matthew 7:3-5. It says, "And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." So, what it's saying here is correct your own mistakes. That way you have beneficial advice you can share from your own experience. So since we can't independently achieve enlightenment, using our limitations as a human being, we can only develop ourselves through trial and error. What do I mean by this is, well, if at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. That's an early 2000s song for those of you younger than 25 and older 50. This doesn't mean that you do the same things that lead you to fail, but you adapt and correct yourself. Do you guys know what the definition of insanity is? Yeah, it's to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So I have ABCs of when you fail. The first thing is to assess what you did wrong. Second thing is to make better decisions next time. And the last is to calibrate when things don't go according to plan. So here's some practical examples of this being exercised in real life. So who has traveled on planes before? Yeah, okay, good. So you know that nowadays, before, cockpit doors to airplanes used to be open. You could actually go talk to a pilot and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Now it's completely locked. There's no razors permitted on board. Smoking on board is prohibited. Liquids over 100 milliliters are banned, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that? Because of threats from the past have caused people to assess, well, how did this threat happen? They made better decisions by either banning something or correcting what they oversaw. And obviously, they calibrated every time something didn't go according to plan. So the TSA and NTSB and other agencies assessed their failures, made decisions to prevent future incidents, and calibrated when things didn't go according to plan. So imagine this: if we witnessed aviation tragedies and did nothing to improve the system, what would happen if it happened again? In your lives, when you witness failure, with God's guidance, improve yourself to prevent it from happening again. I think I'm a little short on time here. Let's see. This might be a very, very short message. This is good. In closing, sometimes, I guess I don't need these papers. In closing, sometimes failures are irreversible. Failed businesses, failed ventures, failed relationships, failed medical procedures, failed marriages, failed pregnancies. The hard truth is there's sometimes no answers to why hardships happen. But we can be assured that where the world fails, Jesus will avenge it. If not here on earth, at least in a different time and place. Failure is not the end game. Get it? Get it? Avenge, end game? Okay. I give credit to Pastor Antoni. He's the one that gave me that joke. So, if you think about it, the cross at the time seemed like a failure, didn't it? People asked, well, how can a Messiah be defeated? How can a king be killed? But we know today that even if it looks like a fail now, through faith we can claim victory. Now, to revisit the practical standpoints again, when you receive a failing grade in school, what sets a good student apart is to ask what they did wrong and to discover how to do it right the next time. Sorry. This would be easier with an iPad. Swipe. On the flip side, what differentiates an instructor from a good teacher or educator? Well, instructors typically spew out facts and critiques mindlessly, but a good teacher will identify your faults and give you the tools and steps to correct it. In our Christian lives, the ultimate teacher is the good rabbi, Jesus. He alone can use our failures for his good. For his good. He points out our failures without calling us one. Jesus calls out our failures without Jesus calls out our failures without calling us a failure. Sorry, I kind of screwed up there. He has the practical tools to help us learn from our mistakes. There is one common theme that the following verses proclaim. When we're surrounded by persistent failures, we can have confidence that Jesus' promises never fail, and neither will he. The last verse that I'm going to read to you guys today is from Deuteronomy 31:6. So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic before them. For the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. So when we're surrounded by persistent failures, we can have confidence that Jesus' promises will never fail, and neither will he. Praise God.
Praise the Lord. I have just heard about Brother Alex, and every time I heard people in the Bible study with him being the teacher, I heard positive things. Now I am positively, it's positively confirmed. He's a good teacher. He's a good deliverer of the message of the Lord. So thank you, Brother Alex. We hope that you'll find more courage to come over and over again when Pastor Andoni calls you. Are we all blessed? Amen. Amen. Why don't we all stand up? Are we gonna